You're listening to the Yoga Medicine Podcast. I'm your host, Rachel Land. This podcast brings you information and resources to enhance the therapeutic effects of your practice based on a deeper understanding of anatomy, physiology, and the integration of modern science and research with traditional practices and experiences. Join me and my co-hosts Tiffany Cruikshank and Katya Bach as we dive into all things yoga, research, and wellness.
The content of this podcast is not medical advice and is not meant to replace medical care. Please consult your healthcare provider to determine what is best for your unique healthcare needs.
Hello, Eding. I'm so excited to welcome you to the Yoga Medicine Podcast. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here.
Thank you so much, Rachel. And you can't even imagine how excited I am to be here with you and doing this podcast. And hopefully people are going to appreciate what's going to be said and what they're going to learn. We're all going to figure it out later.
Yeah, I'm sure whatever you come out with, people will be interested in. You don't know this, but you are one of maybe 5, maybe 6 yoga medicine teachers that my partner Steve actually remembers and is interested in. And this is all because when I first met you, you were in the midst of applying for the astronaut training program. And I remember you didn't think that was such a big deal because you were just applying. It's not like you'd been accepted. But to me and to my partner, this was about the most exciting thing we could possibly imagine. And from what I know about you, from getting to know you a little bit since, it's just the perfect expression of you as a person. You are not afraid of stressful situations and not afraid of putting yourself out to experience those.
Yeah, I guess I was born without the fear factor. No, I'm just kidding. Definitely, I'm more at ease than others to put myself into outside of the box or into situations where I'm out of my comfort zone.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just, I guess, a matter of how I manage my stress in these situations, how I come to terms and rationalize maybe what I want to do, what needs to be done, and what really is my responsibility in any of these situations.
Mm.
Unfortunately, I'm not an astronaut, but maybe one day. The dream is not dead.
Maybe one day. You've got multiple companies to choose from now. It's not just NASA. But we probably won't talk too much about the astronaut training program today, but we will be talking about the ability to manage stress and to maintain our focus even when life gets stressful, because I feel like you have some both professional expertise and also personal experience to share with us there. So maybe we start with a little bit of background and a bit of history. What drew you initially to science, to medicine, and to anesthesiology?
I have to say that ever since I was a kid, I've always been curious. I've always wanted to know the why and the what is behind the scenes of everything, and especially the human body. Understanding why some people were sick, understanding why some people like Olympians had such great performances, just wanting to know every single thing that happened. I was one of those kids that read the back of cereal boxes and looking at ingredients and trying to figure out what did what in what we were eating, and when we ate it, what did it do to the human body? So it's this natural, I guess, curiosity that drew me first and foremost to medicine. And this, I guess, competitive edge that I might possess from having grown up with multiple brothers and just trying to push myself a little bit further outside of the box and just trying to be bigger than myself and experiencing more and more. So I guess it just led me to studying sciences, being very interested in understanding the little processes and then applying everything to the human body afterwards.
Mm.
In terms of anesthesiology, as opposed to any other specialty, my first choice actually in medicine when I first started was to go into pediatrics because I really liked everything and anything that had to do with babies, with kids. I still love it to this day. I might say I'm after all I'm a pediatric anesthesiologist, so I combine both two things that I really do love. But after pediatrics, my big passion was orthopedics. Having a background, having done a lot of sports, being interested in biomechanics really drew me to the specialty where understanding the human biomechanics, interactions between muscles and functionality, and its intricacies, and also the pathology that could be present was super interesting to me until I did a rotation in intensive care, where you have to know the physiology of everything in order to understand what is going well and what is going wrong. And that just fascinated me completely. I was in love. So from that step to go from intensive care to anesthesiology, anesthesiology is very much so applied physiology, but it's not just on the ward. Intensive care is mainly on wards or on a unit, whereas anesthesia is in an operating room. And sometimes we do come out of the ward. We can come out of the OR, I should say. We do go help out in the intensive care. There's a lot of anesthesiologists that are also intensivists. So it was kind of like my next step, being very manual and practical, doing some techniques, working under pressure, and just that thirst of knowledge and applying that knowledge to live situations and thinking ahead, planning. It all came together for me with anesthesiology.
Once again, not afraid to put yourself in not even not afraid, but relishing the stressful situation of intensive care, which for me sounds completely terrifying. So when did yoga come into the picture?
Actually, yoga came into the picture when I was doing my residency, and I was actually doing my intensive care rotations. That stressful, the constant stress of being up to date on pathologies, being up to date on patient statuses, being up to date on patient charts, just kind of has its toll on a person, just trying to keep that focus, trying to just be attuned to everything that's going on, not only with the patients, but with your coworkers, with the staff that's working there. Sometimes you need to have an outlet to kind of funnel all the extra energy, all the extra stress that you don't necessarily need. And that's when I discovered yoga, just that moment that I could have on my mat to myself, breathing, being with myself, thinking about myself was just so precious for that first time where I stepped on the mat and I was like, okay, I don't have to plan ahead. I don't have to think back. I'm here now, and this is what I need to do.
And you initially, as I understand it, were drawn to power vinyasa. Is that right?
Yes, that is correct. So I completed training with Baron Baptiste, as we say in English.
Oh, it sounds much nicer with the French accent.
In Power Vinyasa, it was a fantastic training with a fantastic group. And just being able to move and to breathe through powerful poses just gave me a lot of reason to get myself grounded, because you could just get so carried away with all the movements and just get into the kind of the dance of things. But thinking about the breath in Power Vinyasa is what helps you go through all these poses and flowing through the poses. And then I realized I wanted more. I wanted more from yoga. I wanted to know more about everything, about the breath, about the movement, the fascia, the nerves, everything that was implicated in the practice of yoga. So I continued.
Yeah, you've hit my next question, which is always a thing that comes up for me when I talk to somebody who already has a career track and, you know, a real job. I always think, why put yourself through the stress and the time and the expensive teacher training when you have the practice already? But you've answered it perfectly. Is that hunger to unpack the details and to, you know, take the face off the clock and have a look at the mechanics and see how the whole thing works? And you've done quite a
Yes.
lot of training, not just in Baptiste yoga, but also with yoga medicine.
Yes, I've done quite a number of modules. I have recruited my clients to do my case studies to finish up my 500 hours.
Yes.
It's been a little challenging over the past couple of years, I have to say. Me not wanting to be in contact with other people in terms of getting infected or infecting anybody, if ever. I had the virus. So now that hopefully the restrictions are gonna get lifted on our part here in Canada, I'll be able to really finish up everything and write up and keep going
Yeah.
afterwards.
1,000 hour and on beyond.
Yes.
So you've touched on the pandemic, which it's been an interesting couple of years for a lot of people, but maybe not so much for anyone as it has been for frontline medical workers. And you've been pretty open, especially on Facebook, about trying to share information about COVID-19 and counter some of the misinformation that's just been rampant. So is there anything that you wish people understood, anything that you wish you could communicate to people about the pandemic that they don't seem to be getting?
I guess the biggest message I'd like to communicate is that often the misconceptions are bred out of I guess it's somewhat ignorance or not being able to analyze the information that's presented properly. I would say that everybody has the scientific background or understanding of medical papers. And by no means, I'm not a virologist or a microbiologist. And even myself, looking at the process of how the virus infects a cell and replicates and all that stuff. I mean, I do have some notions, but I'm not a specialist. But understanding that there are specialists out there that actually put out recommendations for a reason. And even if you're young, healthy, and you might not be hit by very serious repercussions from the virus, we each collectively have to do our own part to try and make sure that our neighbor, our parent, our child, people around us remain safe as well. We're lucky to have this independence and to have this freedom in democratic countries, but it also comes with a certain level of responsibility, a certain level of restrictions as well, so that we can afterwards, all of us, move forward freely and not just have a few people doing what they feel like they want to do and then basically restricting the rights and liberties of the majority of others. I find that really sad, but there's panels of experts that are out there, that real experts, I should say, that give us information that it's understand to sit down and really listen and try and not just hear, but listen to the message. There's always an underlying message under everything that they're saying. It's for the collectivity, really.
I feel like anesthesiologists have had a particularly interesting time of it. You shared an article, I think it was from the Washington Post, where a Chicago anesthesiologist had written that intubating COVID patients was like working next to a nuclear reactor. And it was such a powerfully written and emotive piece that it really made me think, you know, tucked away pretty safe in New Zealand, about what some people were having to face every day when they went to work. So you talk about stressful scenarios. I can't think of anything much more stressful than that.
I have to say that at first, when COVID first arrived, when we heard of it, And it was for us in North America, far away in Asia, we're thinking, oh, well, we're staying, it's in Asia, but with globalization and people traveling, of course, it was bound to come to us a couple, not even a couple months, a month later. And with not having all the testing that we have right now, we had no clue what we were dealing with, especially knowing that this first doctor that found out about it died soon after from the virus because he didn't have really proper protection. So going to work in the morning, not knowing first and foremost if you had proper protection at the hospital, but second of all, not even knowing if you'd be able to come back home okay. And for me, the biggest thing was if I was going to wake up to see the next day. I didn't have a clue. Every time I went home, I was just like, maybe I'm going to die in my sleep tonight. I have no clue. So I always made a point to text or call my parents, my brothers, just like, hey, I'm home. This is stressful, but I guess I'll talk to you tomorrow. But it was that stress was so intense that I know it sounds pretty crazy, but I would sometimes cry myself to sleep because I didn't know if I was going to wake up the next day. Then I would wake up the next day and be like, this is a reset. This is a new day. Let's go and do it. Like if I did something right yesterday and I didn't get myself infected, I'm going to do the same thing the next day and maybe perfect it so that none of my skin is showing today, and then take a shower when you get home and, be very, very careful with what you do. So.
I think nearly 2 years down the track, it's sort of easy for the rest of us to feel used to the limited precautions that we need to take and think of it as not being a big deal. But those early days must have been really scary. And you've kind of hit exactly the topic that we were hoping to explore today, which is our capacity to pay attention and to maintain focus, especially under pressure, because, I'm great at paying attention when it's quiet and the environment is tidy and I've done all the things that I need to do and, there's no distractions around me. But, you turn on an alarm or add any kind of distraction and my capacity to focus diminishes. But what you were experiencing then, and even in your normal job before the pandemic, requires you to be able to pay attention to processes, procedures, varied sources of information from different places and perform under pressure. So maybe as a sort of bridge into this topic of focusing under pressure, you could explain what a pediatric anesthesiologist does, even when there isn't a pandemic on. What does that job involve?
So in terms of regular work, pediatric anesthesiology takes care. I do pediatric and adults. So for the whole range of the population, I put patients either to sleep or I do procedures to make them comfortable before, during, and after either a surgical procedure or a procedure that's not necessarily surgical, but that could be very painful. Like giving sedation for something that would really, really hurt, but they don't need to be completely under because they're not going to, for instance, cut open a belly or a leg. Anything that has to do around that, as well as pain control after operations or after painful procedures for a certain duration of time. Sometimes it could be a couple of days after the operation. Sometimes it could be a couple of weeks. Just making sure that all the patients are very comfortable, whether they're, 2 days old, 2 hours old, up to over 100 years old. So that's what we do. We're the specialists at manipulating the airways, meaning breathing is life, ABCs, airway, breathing, circulation. So if your airways are not working properly, your breathing is going to be a little bit iffy. We're the specialists at making sure that you have an airway to ensure that you could breathe. If you can't breathe by yourself, we will help you breathe. So if an intensivist or an emergency physician or even any type of physician on the ward, emergency, intensive care needs help with a patient that doesn't have a patent airway, we're the ones they call. We're also specialists in a lot of procedures, especially anything that has to do with vascular access, meaning if you need to give medication to someone through their veins, whether a small vein or a big vein, and there's a certain level of difficulty, they're going to call us because we're really, really, really good at doing that. We're really good at finding veins, big ones and small ones, and putting all sorts of needles and stuff in there. I shouldn't say needles, that will scare people, but little cap.
Fair enough. So I'm thinking of you during surgical procedures. You're going to be watching monitors, but you're also going to be paying attention to the patient, and you'll also be paying attention to the people in the room. And you've got to be able to maintain focus no matter what happens, even if there are alarms bleeping or somebody drops a tray of instruments or whatever. You've got to be able to keep that sustained focus no matter how stakes the situation or how high stakes the situation or what kind of pressure is going on. So maybe from what you've learned in your studies, you could explain a little bit about how the brain allocates attention. You know, how do we pay attention? What neurological processes are involved?
Okay, so for attention and specifically the stress response, there's a lot of these processes that come from the midbrain that's connected to the cortex, to whatever is up top. Midbrain is a little bit lower. And it's a constant feedback going up and down in terms of neurotransmitters that are going to be moving up and moving down. So for paying attention, especially in terms of awakeness, consciousness, in terms of anxiety, stress, it's an area of the brain that's called the locus ceruleus.
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful Latin name.
Mm-hmm.
That is a major player in the process. I'd like to say, if you'd like to learn more about this, the internal medicine module on the nervous system and restorative yoga is fantastic for this. Everything is explained at length, and I'm pretty sure you enjoy it.
Super in depth.
Yes, very in depth. So this locus ceruleus actually is a major actor in the production of the noradrenaline, which is one of the neurotransmitters that is involved in the attention and stress response. Mm-hmm. So noradrenaline is also secreted at the cerebrals, the adrenal glands, which helps in the fight or flight response, as well as the epinephrine or noradrenaline is the same thing as norepinephrine. I should mention, depending if you're in the United States or in any other country. So with the noradrenaline, there's always a fine balance in terms of if you have too much or if you don't have enough. If you don't have enough, you're going to be in a depressed state, anxious state. It could also trigger PTSD, depression, very, very low energy levels. Whereas with the noradrenaline, you have more blood flow to the muscles, you're more active, you're more awake. Your body needs to get used to certain stimuli in order to try and accommodate the state you have to be in to focus and pay attention in a certain situation. Mm-hmm. When there's external stimuli, when there's noise, when there's things going on, there has to be a process called habituation that takes place so that your brain actually knows that there's going to be some outside noise and stimuli that are going to be there, even though you need to focus on something. So it's going to get used to what's going on around you and analyze it and then decide that, okay, it's going on, but there's nothing important in what's going on around me. So what I want to put the beam on, what I want to focus on right now is what I'm going to use my noradrenaline for is right in front of me. This period of habituation can take any time from 10 minutes to half an hour, depending on who you are. Mm. I find with my medical training, but even before my medical training, for me, I could sleep in a room where there's a party and music playing. I have no problems falling asleep. I'm just going to be like, give me 15 minutes, I'll take a power nap. Mm-hmm. My brain has been habituated to that extra noise and the extra stimuli. But if I hear the tiniest little beep of something that's not normal, I will wake up. I will hear that beep and be like, what was that? Something's going on. Mm-hmm. It's just a process that over time you can someone perfect depending on what you're doing in order to really have a better grasp of the task at hand.
So you said a couple of things there that I want to explore a little more. The first one was that attention is linked sort of to the stress response. And we often think about the stress response as being something negative, like, oh, we never want to be stressed. We always want to be super calm. But there's a level of stress that allows us to be alert and present and to shine that beam of attention where we want to shine it. And I guess it's just a matter of fine-tuning the balance between not enough stress, not enough alertness, not enough arousal versus too much, hypervigilant. Everything's interesting. Everything's taking our focus and finding that sort of midway point. So that in itself, I think, is really interesting because often I think people feel that they need to be completely calm to focus. But the truth is we want some level of alertness and arousal. That's important. We don't always want to be in that parasympathetic nervous state.
Mm. And there's also the fact that with that certain level of noradrenaline in your system, that alertness, it also stimulates the prefrontal cortex where all the executive decisions are being made. Mm. So your focus is actually being helped by high level decision center in your brain because you have the ability with this extra blood, with these extra transmitters to really think, literally to think. So it goes together with that stress because if you don't have that little extra stress and you're just completely relaxed all the time, sometimes your brain can be turned off somewhat. Mm.
I mean, that's the point for me of, heading into Shavasana is switch this thing off. Mm-hmm. Let's have a break. But if you, snapped your fingers at the end of Shavasana and said to me, quick, make a high stakes decision, it would take me too long to summon up my reserves. So that level of calm and release and relaxation is great, but not all the time. Not good when you need to make quick, agile decisions and you want to have access to those executive functions. So that's fascinating. I think that's really important for us all to wrap our heads around. Stress is not always a bad thing, people. It's all about the dose and the appropriateness of timing. And then the other thing that you talked about there, habituation, I also find fascinating because the things that would distract me and stop me from being able to pay attention, some I've probably gotten used to without even noticing, and some still sit in the basket of things that are unusual. So I don't have kids. And if I ever visit somebody with children, the noise I find incredibly distracting. I can't hold a conversation. I can't hold a thought, but parents are pretty good at doing that because they're habituated to a background level of noise. And I presume if it gets to some level of intensity or crescendo, then they start to pay attention. But otherwise, it's just all fine happening there in the background, like you with the party.
Yes. Or in an operating room, it's extremely, it could get very, very noisy at times. And, when it's overboard, when it's over the top, there's always the option of trying to bring it down a bit just to help out, just to make sure that you get used to a certain level and then it could go on again. Or you remove yourself from the situation to think clearly and then you get back in. those are all little tricks to make sure that you don't lose that focus, because focus doesn't last forever either. Depending on the person, some have a good attention span where they could say a good hour focus on something, while someone else, it's going to be 15 minutes.
Yeah, I heard even less than that on a podcast recently. I can't remember who it was. Maybe it was Huberman Labs, saying that the average adult attention span is 3 minutes, which just made me very sad for the state of my poor brain. I mean, hopefully you can focus for more than 3 minutes while there's surgery going on or some kind of procedure going on, but I don't know whether I can. So you kind of led into the next thing, which is, let's talk about some tools and techniques that you've found helpful to maintain your beam of attention where you want it to be. And you mentioned one was trying to bring the noise down at times if you need to, and another was actually exiting the situation for a moment to get clarity and then coming back into it. What else can you think of that's been helpful for you in focusing your attention?
For me, I call it catching my breath. So taking some nice deep breaths in, exhaling very slowly, fresh oxygen to the brain. It just kind of resets also my heart rate, brings down, you get a more parasympathetic tone, brings down that high tone of stress. Really, really helps me with resetting and getting my focus back on. And fresh air also, outside fresh air is truly key. So that's one thing. If I can't go outside, or if I am stuck in an operating room, for instance, I actually like doing squats. Just to try and get the blood pumping. It's not just looking around. Yes, I'm working, but if I have a minute, I'm just going to do a few squats or sit in a chair pose for a couple seconds. I'm not going to say a couple minutes.
That's really interesting, though. Do you think it's just a matter of kind of reuniting with your body again, getting a little bit out of the head, coming back into the big muscles of the body, and sharing some blood flow around and going, okay, we're here, we're present, refresh, refocus. That's fascinating. Yeah. What else?
Hydration. Hydration. Often we don't realize how little we drink during the day. If you're doing a very active job, not necessarily sitting at a desk where, you have a chance to drink some fluids that are not necessarily tea or coffee that could dehydrate you. But some clear fluids or hydration, in order to have good cell functions, good electrolyte balance is key. We don't realize it, but when we have a little bit of a brain fog, we're not a little bit quite sure what's going on, we feel a little bit low, drinking a glass of water can refresh you in ways that one cannot even imagine.
My mother will be very happy to hear you say that, because it's usually her first response if anything's wrong. Oh, I've got a bit of a headache. Are you well hydrated? Feeling a bit foggy? Are you well hydrated? She listens to the podcast, so she'll be very happy to hear you mention hydration. Thank you, Eding, from my mother.
And now it's more and more popular if your workplace allows for it, or if your work schedule allows for it, to have a quick reset nap. REM sleep is the one thing that can actually reset everything at the locus coeruleus. So it's what suppresses that stress response. So sleeping with having a rapid eye movement is actually something that's going to help bring that recess and try and dissipate that stress somewhat. So
it fascinates me that the medical field is probably one of the ones that is the most inhibitory to good sleep patterns. And yet the rest of us on the planet really are depending on you all being well rested and having good focus and good memory and good reserves. It's interesting, isn't it? But the more we learn about sleep, the more crucial it is to not just body function, but brain function. So yes.
Definitely.
So you've talked about some in the moment, taking a breath, slowing your exhalation, finding just the right level of nervous system arousal. You've talked about stepping out if you can, or refreshing your focus by being outside altogether if you can. You've talked about bringing some blood flow back into the body, doing a chair pose, doing some squats. And these are all really good in the moment tips. And then you've also talked about some that are slightly longer term solution, like hydration, electrolyte balance, good sleep. Where does your yoga practice fit in those sort of longer term solutions of resetting your balance point?
So my yoga practice, typically when I come home from work, I either like doing flow, vinyasa, or restorative,
Mm.
especially if it's a big, long day or after a long call, being up all night. There's certain key positions that I just love and that could put me to sleep in literally 2 seconds, just to um, bring down this sympathetic tone that I had to keep built up for that many hours. Like I had no choice. I had to be ready to go, fight or flight. Let's go, let's go. Um, and coming home, for instance, one of the ones I really like is just doing a, a very simple Surya Namaskar A to get the blood flow going. So that helps. If I want to wake up a little bit more, if I want to get more blood flowing into my body, nothing too complicated, just sun salutations.
Mm.
That is beautiful to me. If I want to be a little bit more laid back, try to get myself more towards a nap or sleeping, I love doing legs up the wall. Love, love,
Mm.
love. Bringing the blood back to the heart, relaxing, opening up the chest to favor big, wide inspirations, deep breaths in, and also softening the shoulders, soft belly, just being completely, completely relaxed and getting that blood flow back to the heart, back to the brain. Beautiful position. And some also gentle inversions,
Mhm.
such as a reclining hero or the version of that pose on a bolster
Oh,
to open
yeah.
up the once again, just to get the breathing going. We get a lot of tension in the shoulders when we work, just walking around or writing, and having everything open once again is just
Mm.
beautiful and so yummy. And another one I really, really do like is child's pose. I find that it's to me, it's kind of like I'm in my cocoon and I'm protecting myself. I'm opening up my back, but my heart is close to the ground. My head is close to the ground. I can do a good introspection like this. I breathe well. My
Mm.
arms are relaxed, and I'm really grounded. It brings me down completely. My parasympathetic system really, really gets activated and gets that craziness of stress out.
That makes a lot of sense to me. So you have this job that's pretty high pressure and pretty high stakes, even though a lot of it, I'm sure, is routine. It's things that you do a lot. And sometimes that can be even harder to pay attention to when it's something that you do all the time. And you use your practice as this buffer between whatever you've had to do today to get through your workday and what you need to refresh and revitalize and rest and recharge your batteries. And sometimes you've got excess nervous energy that you need to give a channel to, that you need to get out and get back into your body. And sometimes there's a sense of depletion that you need to fill up with something quieter and more still and more restorative. So I love that. You've kind of got levers that you can adjust depending on the residue that the day has left in you. And that to me is, hearing you talk about your practice in that way is what I would wish for every yoga student, to be able to have all of these tools at their disposal, whether it's in the moment, like breathing when you need to clear your head, or over the longer term to reset their baseline, to pick and choose what they need to help them find balance. That to me is a wonderful thing. We haven't talked about meditation yet, but I know there's actually some reasonable research about meditation improving our capacity for memory and focus. Do you have any meditation techniques that you've found helpful or beneficial, or for you, is it more about reconnecting with the body?
For me, actually, especially over the past 2 years, it's been first thing in the morning, sitting up in bed, just taking a good 10, 15 minutes, and I have mantras.
Mm.
So I tell myself a mantra that morning, that day. I pick my mantra when I wake up, and I just keep thinking about my mantra and just breathing slowly and deeply, just to get myself in the right mind space, and just try to really erase anything that could have happened the day before and any expectations of the day I might be having.
Mm.
Every day being different, but sometimes when we know a little bit what's going to happen during the day, there is anticipation that builds up, and the sleep can't be that great. So trying to reset that, the expectations and the fears or the stress that everything, all this the situation might trigger, is what I try to do with the meditation. I have to say, I try to be very good and do it every single morning. Some morning when I have meetings that are too early, I can't. I need to sleep. It's meditating or sleeping, and in those
Yeah.
instances, I pick sleeping.
I would always pick sleep too. Sleep is first and foremost. And I think about meditation the same way that I think about pretty much everything, like your diet, your finances. It's what you do most of the time that's impactful, not the last 2%, but it's the 98% or even less, probably the 80% that makes the big difference. And if you miss a day because you need your sleep, you need your sleep. No big deal. Yeah. I love
Yeah.
that. So meditation sort of sets the foundation for today, for the day, and hopefully releases any sort of attachment from the day before or expectation for the day ahead. You have your day, some of that's in your control and some of that's not in your control. And then at the end of the day, you have a more physical practice to help you dial the nervous system to where you need it to be to rest. I think that's
Yes.
wonderful. That sounds like an absolutely perfect regime.
And the thing that's very important to emphasize is that all these little parts, they don't have to take an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours.
Mm.
It's literally a matter of minutes. If you're able to practice for 15 minutes, it's better than zero.
Mm.
It doesn't have to last a certain period of time. It's whatever you can get during your day that's going to be beneficial.
Mm.
If I get home from work at 10 p.m. or 11 p.m. and I know I have to be up at 5 the next morning, I'm not going to practice for an hour, but a little 5, 10 minutes is going to do the trick.
Mm.
So to be a yogi, you don't have to practice yoga for hours every day. If 5 minutes will do it.
And I find too that the more familiar something is, like the sun salutations that you mentioned, this very familiar rhythmic groove that as soon as you're in it, your body and your mind, they recognize that familiarity and the response becomes much quicker the more habituated you are. Or the same with
Yeah.
child's pose or legs up the wall. You get into that familiar place and your mind goes, ah, yes, yes, ah. And it can happen in 60 seconds, whereas maybe the first time it took 10 minutes, the more often that pathway is created, the more quickly you slip into that groove.
Yes. And once again, I will mention it, neurotransmitter, noradrenaline, and locus ceruleus, neuroplasticity. It works on that as well. So
Mm.
it plays with the habituation, the neuroplasticity. It goes with it. Yeah.
Mm. I love that. We can use that to our advantage by choosing the familiar things that will respond to quickly, that give us the desired result. So we've
Yeah.
talked quite a bit about kind of playing with the stress response, playing with that bell curve of there are times in our life where it's appropriate for us to be super calm and really relaxed and very receptive, and there are times in our life where it's important for us to be much more awake and aware and alert and taking in details of our surroundings. There are times when it's important for us to be in the middle, where we're
Yeah.
calm but also able to focus and pay sustained attention. And I remember from the mental health and wellness training, we talked about the Yerkes-Dodson law, where there's an optimal level of arousal for different tasks. And for more difficult tasks, ideally, we would feel a little calmer. And for easier tasks that are more familiar, that require less thought, we might need a slightly higher level of nervous system arousal to stay present so that we don't kind of dial out. Yeah. So finding that exactly right level of arousal is key. And we have some control over that. It's not just something that happens to us. You've talked about various different ways that we can fine tune that balance. So is there anything else about focus, attention, or even stress that you want to mention before we move on?
Well, I'm not a neurobiologist or an endocrinologist or any of those specialists, but my take-home message would be that stress is actually good. Stress is something that we need to learn to live with, and we cannot eliminate completely in our lives.
Sounds like COVID. Sounds like you're doing the COVID speech right now. But it's true.
It is true. It's a question of managing it. And speaking of COVID, everybody is stretched pretty thin right now, just from having over the past 2 years to endure restriction and constraints and uncertainties and setbacks. One thing that helps with stress and anxiety and panics and all that is definitely making sure that you're kind to yourself and you get to reward yourself. The reward pathways are also used up by the same neurotransmitters that are going to help with the stress regulation. So being able to allow yourself to do something pleasurable is going to help with that stress. So not always beating yourself up or being so hard on yourself is going to help in the long run as well, because you will have that stress. Just find a way to make it enjoyable.
I love that you mentioned that. That would never have occurred to me, that it's like to fill up the pool of attention that we have to give, we've got to fill it up with some enjoyment. You can't just be focused and attentive all the time. You've got to have some fun too. You've just justified my love of trashy TV. That's what allows me to pay such focused attention for 3 minutes at a time when I'm studying. I love that. I'm really glad that you mentioned that. Kindness to ourselves is something that I would not have thought of in the context of attention and focus. But you're so right. You know, sometimes I think about our brains as a little bit like training a dog, for example. Some of the same rules apply, don't they? And you can't just train a dog to do the thing without them having some reward.
Yeah, it's true. It's
true.
We're hard on ourselves, and more than we need to be, you know? So everybody being different, of course, but it's just kind of like a little nugget that I'm throwing out there, so that if people find that they're beating themselves up and they're feeling down and they don't think that things are progressing the way they want them to be, just take a step back, try and have a look at what's going on, and try and reward yourself for what you've actually accomplished. It's going to help with motivation. It's going to help with reducing anything that is negative, so you can fill it up with positive and help yourself come back up again.
I love that, because we're not always so good at reflecting backward in a celebratory sort of or congratulatory way. When we look back, often it's to kind of ruminate or to second guess, but to actually look back and go, look how far I've come, look at what I've done already. Our tendency is either to look forward and see what we haven't done or what we haven't got yet, or to look back and ruminate, as opposed to looking back and celebrating and targeting those reward pathways. I like that. I think that's a really beautiful thing to add in here. Well, I have one more topic. I have one more topic to bring up, and that is that it's Black History Month this month in the US and in Canada. And I wanted to hear your take on that. What does that mean to you?
Uh, for me, I find that having to highlight a special month for Black history is in 2022 is bittersweet
Mm,
because I mean it's great. I'm not spitting down on the idea, but it should be something that should be highlighted every day.
mhm.
Um, we should have moved by leaps and bounds from when all the issues with slavery and the issues with racism were actually really prevalent, but still in 2022, it's ongoing. Looking at what's going on in the United States, because we get their newscast, it's still horrifying.
Mm.
And in Canada, although it's not broadcasted all over the world, we do have our issues and we do have our stories, even here in Montreal. And it just breaks my heart to still be witness to this in 2022. And I think of my young nephews and how they're gonna grow up. Like, why should they be subjected to this?
Mm.
There's no reason. There is absolutely no reason for people not to be conscious of inequalities that are still present. There's no reason for history books not to be updated to really reflect history of what happened to Black people, but not just Black people, Indigenous, all the
Mm.
other groups that are marginalized. Um, we do progress from year to year, but in my opinion, we're still so far off target, so far off target. There's still a high level of education that needs to be put forth to try and sensitize people, because people are aware that there's something happening, but I don't think that they're sensitized because it's not happening to them.
Yeah. Yeah. That's how our brains work, don't they? We've all got our own problems to worry about and our heads are down, and it can be easy to forget to look up and see things from other people's perspective. You posted one thing on either Facebook or Instagram that really struck me about being a black medical student and a couple of
Oh,
experiences that various medical students had had. And one was as simple as the medical student saying, I walked into a patient's room with a stethoscope around my neck. The nurse handed me the trash can.
yeah,
And that's just,
it me 2 in the morning. 2 in the morning, I'm actually caring for a patient in the intensive care. Um, I'm because I have a good knowledge of how ventilators work. I was changing the ventilator parameters. Typically, it's respiratory therapists that are being called up by physicians to do that. But I mean, I know what the ratios are. I know how they work. I could do it myself. And I was asked to empty out a trash can at 2 in the morning. I I was a little bit baffled, but I put my focus somewhere else.
yeah.
Literally, I was just like, well, it's not the time and place for this. I need to take care of someone else. So back burner for this, but let's move forward.
Mm,
If I keep focusing on every single little microaggression, I'd never leave my house.
yeah.
Um,
Ain't that the truth?
yeah, so it's a question of focus, and it's a question of, it's sad to say, somewhat resilience in like pushing forward and ignoring all this, because
Mm,
it adds up at some point where you just like, I'm doing everything I can and it doesn't seem to be enough. Like, what else can I do? When really there's nothing else you could do.
yeah.
Even educating people, there's nothing else you could do if someone doesn't want to listen to
Mm. And even those of
you.
us who do want to listen, it's really easy to get lost in our own crap, isn't it? And not to
Mm.
spare the time to think about what other people are experiencing. What about in the yoga world? Have you had any experiences as a yoga student or a teacher that you feel only happened to you because of your skin color? Anything that you think of there?
No, I haven't had that. I find that the yoga world it's quite accepting in the sense that you're on your mat, um, you're a community, you practice together. Um, there's a lot less judgment in that world, whether you're a teacher or you're a student. What I find is interesting is once I did bring my tall, very strong brother to a yoga class, and he actually found it interesting because people were kind of staring at him like this tall black guy in the class, like what is he doing here? And him having that feeling of not being accepted or being judged. But and that's what he told me afterwards, especially since he was a beginner. So maybe for Black men, it's a different reality that I haven't experienced. You know, it's not just the color of the skin, but it's also the gender that needs to be considered, which is something that I find really interesting. And my eyes were open to it, especially in the yoga world, but also in inequalities when we look at crime rates and who's being stopped and who's going to prison. But more closer to home for me, it was actually yoga.
Yeah, I think we forget sometimes when we're used to the yoga atmosphere and the yoga studio, and we know how it all works and how things happen. It's easy to forget what it's like to walk into that space the first time and not kind of know what the rules are and not quite know what the correct behaviors are, and to feel separate from the culture in the room. And to add the racial aspect to that, to add the gender aspect to that, you can imagine how you'd walk into a space and not instantly feel like you belonged. I think we can all relate to that feeling from our first time in a yoga studio, perhaps, and then layer on some other things on top.
Yeah.
Well, is there any kind of hopes that you would have for the future in relation to Black History Month? Is it maybe that one day we won't need to have one, that that won't be the need to separate out?
To me, that would be fantastic. But my hope is that education is revised so that the real facts about everything that happened, whether it's in Canada, the United States, the real Black history, the Underground Railway, everything, the Black Wall Street, everything is actually put forth in the light so that people can read about it, people can look it up, and people can actually know. Because for me in high school, my history class, there was none of it. Zero, none. And I don't find that really normal. And it's just now that they're starting to maybe try and get some information out. So I really do hope that the educational system forges ahead and broadcasts all that information so that people know about it, because knowing is power, and having the power to change something is the greatest asset that a population could have, literally.
Yeah, we've talked quite a bit actually about the power of the brain today and our capacity to shine the focus on our attention where we choose to. But if there's information that isn't available to us, we don't even have that option, do we? We can't even choose to focus on it or not if we don't know that it exists. So education is a pretty good place to start, and maybe to finish this conversation for today. So we've covered some territory, and a lot of it relating to stress, and hopefully reframing stress for people a little way, because there's some stress that we can control, there's some that we can't, but what we do have control over is our response to it and the levers that we can pull on, like our breath, movement practices, meditation, the things that allow us to dial it up or dial it down as we need to. We do always have those tools at our disposal. And there's a lot more in-depth information into the brain and into neurotransmitters and into the stress response in the nervous system and restorative yoga teacher training that you're a part of. But where else could people find you if they're keen to learn more?
People can find me on Instagram. You just have to type in my name and I will pop up. You can always you can always DM me. Same for Facebook. You can DM me on Facebook or Instagram. Or if you actually go onto the Yoga Medicine website, you can easily find me there as well. So those are, I think, the three main places where you can get a hold of me. If I don't reply right away, it's not because I don't want to.
Don't take it personally.
Don't take it personally. I'm actually pretty good at replying, but I'm being bombarded from all sides. I reply in a timely fashion, though. So
you've been kind enough to bust some COVID myths for me when I'm like, "Oh, this looks reputable. Is it?" You've been kind enough to reply back and say, "Not so much." So thank you very much for not just for answering my random COVID misinformation questions, but just for all of the work that you do and continue to do through the pandemic and beyond to help people at perhaps some of the most stressful moments in their lives. So thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for sharing from your professional expertise and from your personal experience too. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Rachel. It was truly a pleasure to see you today. I had a lot of fun doing this interview, and I hope we get to see each other in person soon because
one day.
It's been a long time. It has
been a long time. We've just had an announcement in New Zealand that maybe our borders will be reopening around October. So, hey, maybe a trip is in store for me at some point in the future one day. Thank you so much, Eding.
Thank you. And I wish you a beautiful day because I'm pretty sure it's daytime for you now.
It is. Pouring rain, but it is daytime.
Oh, okay. At least it's not snow.
True. Very true. Thanks for listening to Yoga Medicine. If you liked the show, be sure to subscribe and leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you got something out of this episode, please spread the word and share it with a friend. You can find more information, articles, trainings, and classes at yogamedicine.com. Check us out on social media as Yoga Medicine, or you can email us at info@yogamedicine.com. Thank you for being part of our Yoga Medicine community.
The content of this podcast is not medical advice and is not meant to replace medical care. Please consult your healthcare provider to determine what is best for your unique healthcare needs.